Quiet on set. Picture is up. All right, roll sound.
Rolling.
Roll cameras.
Cams rolling.
And 3, 2.
Hey everybody, what's going on? And welcome back to Hank's Think Tank. It's the weekend. I'm looking forward to it. It's actually Easter weekend, so I think that's going to be a special weekend for us. We got a good thing going, and I've got a great show. I've got Texas House Representative Steve Toth in today. He's out of District 15, and he has co-authored and assisted in a lot of legislation, actually, but the two that we're going to talk about today is the Texas Firearms Protection Act and the elimination of critical race theory in the classroom. Welcome aboard, Mr. Toth. How you doing?
Good, Hank. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
And
thank you for the coffee.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad you were able to take time out of your schedule
and
come check us out. So really, I'd like to get started on critical race theory. It's a hot topic. It's countrywide. You were the guy that was instrumental in banning it here. So how did it happen?
You know, if it wasn't for COVID-19, parents would have no idea
Really?
in the United States that critical race theory was going on. And it's only because of virtual education that parents had the opportunity to see what's going on inside the classroom. And so moms and dads started asking more questions.
Awesome.
And in response to it, and their frustration was that they would see this stuff going on, they'd call their principal, and the principal would say, "We're not teaching critical race theory in our schools." And they'd go to the school board meetings, and the superintendent would say, "We're not teaching critical race theory in our schools." And it's like a Yogi Berra question: who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Right. It's going on, and they would conflate it and say, "Well, critical race theory is a legal curriculum that's taught in college," which is true.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. But the basic premise of critical race theory is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Right, which means you're a white guy, you're a systemically racist person.
Right.
We live in a systemically racist world, and because I am a person of color, I'm screwed, and there's nothing I can do about it. That's the basic understanding of critical race theory, and that is what is being taught in our classrooms today.
That's the crux when you add all the tenets together.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
That's absolutely the crux
Correct.
of it.
Correct.
And, it's unfortunate that somebody even came up with that.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the deal: to say that to a 10-year-old kid or a 12-year-old kid, you're a racist. You have to own that. You also have to own what happened 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 50 years ago during Jim Crow. You have to own that. That's your fault, and you should feel awful about that. You should convey that guilt to a child and say that you're guilty of racism because of what your ancestors did. I had a state rep. They came up to me in the back halls and said to me, "I'm justified in hating you because of what your ancestors did to my ancestors. And until you make some sort and some form of," and I can't remember what do you call it?
Reparations?
Reparations.
Yeah.
So until you make reparations for it, I'm justified. And I'm like,
But
hey,
that's this generation. So when the next generation comes and they haven't received reparations,
Correct.
we do it again?
Correct. And as if we haven't paid reparations already in the form of a welfare system that leaves our poor people the least impoverished of any poor people in the world.
Right.
But here's what I said to him. I said, first off, my ancestors didn't do anything to your ancestors. My ancestors were in Budapest, Hungary, where my grandfather was beaten for his religious beliefs.
Right.
So if you want to talk to me about discrimination and being the victim of discrimination, your ancestors were victimized wrongly, so unjustly, so because of the color of their skin. My ancestors were victimized because of their religious belief.
Mm-hmm.
Hatred just isn't bound just to the color of your skin. It may be religion. It may be a belief system. It may be a part of the place. This is ridiculous, and so you don't have the market cornered on victimization.
That's for sure. the Jews probably have that.
Yeah.
I mean, because they've been victimized since BC.
My grandfather died probably 10 or 15 years before he should have, because of the beatings that he took in Hungary. He died of kidney failure in 1970. And he shouldn't have.
See, my ancestors come from Holland. So, I'm a first-generation American, actually, natural born.
Right.
So, we didn't have much to do with that either. But even if we did, at what point has the debt been paid?
Never. It's kind of like when Barack Obama came into the White House and Nancy Pelosi kept blaming the economy on George Bush. Well, when do we get to blame Barack Obama? Never.
Well, here's a problem that I have with critical race theory. I think the first tenet of critical race theory is that race is a social construct.
Completely.
Yeah, and how is it not biological?
Melanin, we all have different.
It's biological,
right? It's
right.
And
it doesn't mean that people of color are any less important or more important than a white person.
Correct.
Or any less healthy or more healthy, or any less intelligent or more intelligent. But there are biological differences. And you can't turn that into a social construct. So why attempt that? And that's the first tenet. So you move all the way down to, I think it's called the voice of color. And that's where black people in America claim that they have been persecuted so harshly and so long that they deserve the right to speak for all other persecuted groups, boiling all the way down to the LGBTQ community, Jews, and everyone else, that
right.
they have the right.
Correct. And they would also like to conflate that it's not just black people, it's people of color.
People of color, correct.
Right. Now, let's understand this correctly then. CACACNY, Chinese American Citizen Alliance of New York. There's also a Chinese American Citizen Alliance of the United States, but CACACNY in New York City reports that numerous Asians are being victimized, beaten on the sidewalks and in subways by black people. Why? Because they would state that Asians don't fall into this category. Asians have risen above it. Asians have basically said, we choose not to participate in victimhood.
Right.
We are going to overcome. And they are. They're killing it. I mean, in all aspects of society, they're including Anglos. They're doing way better than the average Joe white person like you or me are doing. Why? Because they've chosen not to participate in victimhood, and they've chosen to overcome it, and they've chosen to make their kids work harder in school.
Right.
And it's paying off.
Right.
But that whole idea of working hard and getting ahead, in other words, a merit-based system, merit-based systems, according to the BLM movement, and they even said it on their website, is a thing of whiteness, which is silly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you look at equity from almost any angle, equity can't work. It might work in the short term.
Let's explain it though, because the average person, Hank, doesn't know what you just said.
Okay, go ahead. I like.
Well, there's a big damn difference between equity and equality.
Right.
In their eyes,
absolutely.
right? You and I believe in equality. We will, lay our life down for equality.
Right.
And we will say and state very clearly that injustice needs to be called out. Injustice needs to be kicked to the curb. But we're not talking about that with equity. We're not talking about equal opportunity. We're talking about equal outcomes. And they're saying that if there aren't equal outcomes, I think at Southern New Hampshire University, they run these commercials on television. And they said, everyone needs a chance because we're all equally qualified. We're just not all, there just aren't all equal outcomes. Well, wait a minute. Seriously? We're all equally qualified? I'm not equally qualified. I don't have the mind of Bill Gates.
Right.
I don't have the jump shot of Michael Jordan. I don't have the golf swing of Tiger Woods.
Right.
Right? We're not all equally qualified. We're not all equally gifted.
20%.
There's a huge disparate sharing of
Oh, yeah.
gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. 20% of Americans today have an IQ of less than 84. The military won't even take a person with an IQ of less than 84. So how can you extend equality of outcome to an individual that's got a 127 IQ and you give the same person that's got an 84 IQ the same opportunity or the same outcome equalization? That can't happen.
Right.
It won't work.
Right.
Equality of opportunity is a different thing, but equality of outcome, I mean, it can't work. What are you going to do? Give everybody universal basic income?
That's exactly what they want.
What'll happen? What'll happen to all the products and services? We already have experienced a little piece of universal basic income with the checks that everybody received during COVID.
Right.
How many people quit their jobs and just decided not to work anymore?
So
You know?
we had a terrible time trying to get guys to come back to work.
Oh yeah, we still are.
And I mean, my company, I mean, it was very, very difficult. We could have grown our business. We just couldn't find employees.
Right. Yeah, it changed the mentality of people. And it was just a small portion of what would happen if you instituted universal basic income. And even if that universal basic income wasn't much,
Right.
I mean, just barely enough to survive on,
Yeah.
you would have catastrophic problems in this country.
But you and I, we're not saying that there isn't racism in the world.
No, there is. There's systemic racism in this country. Take our prison system, for instance. I think it suffers from systemic racism.
I'm going to
Can it be resolved?
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm going to push back though and say, I served on the corrections committee my freshman year in the legislature, and you want to look at it and say, wait a minute, there's significantly more black people than white people,
Right.
and to the point where it's a dramatic difference in that African Americans are 13% of the population, black people are 13% of the population. Why are they 70% of the jail system?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Is that a result of systemic racism, or is that a fault of a systemic political system that has created this problem? So part of the Great Society movement that LBJ worked so hard on was the war on poverty. Well, what happened in the war on poverty? They said to inner city women, black women,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have a man in the house and you're a single mom, we're going to give you X amount of money. The more babies you have, the more money we're going to give you. I've done marriage and family life counseling as a pastor for 30 years. And if you want to ask 9 out of 10 couples what they're struggling with a couple of years into marriage, it's finances.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you've got a little or a lot,
Right.
but even more so if you've got a little, right? And so what you're saying to a young woman, throw the bomb out and just have babies.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the 40s and 50s, the black family was strong and stable and doing well. Impoverished, yes. Jim Crow, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Racism that they struggled and fought against, yes. But the home unit was strong in the United States. And the war on poverty destroyed it, absolutely destroyed it. So now what you have is you have a lot of little boys growing up without a dad,
Right.
teaching them how to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
And yet BLM, their main target is the heterosexual male father figure in the home.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing of whiteness, according to them. Well, talk about doubling down on stupid. I mean, the reason why we've got so many young men in jail today is because they don't have dads that showed them how to be good dads. And then on top of it, the national teachers unions have made it nearly impossible to fix the education system in the United States. So go into the inner city, go into a prison system in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere in the United States. You're going to find out that 60% of the men are functionally illiterate.
Right.
Of those 60% that are functionally illiterate, 60% of them are dyslexic. How come they were never identified in school, in our wonderful public education system?
Mm-hmm.
And yet when you try and reform public education system, it's the teachers union
Right.
and the educrats that stand in your way of trying to help these people. It's just, it's criminal. So yeah, I believe that there is racism. I'll tell you a quick little story. I didn't grow up in Texas. I grew up in North Texas, a little town called New York.
Okay.
And the N-word up there was like dropping the F-bomb. You just didn't use that word.
Right.
Ever. You got your mouth washed out with soap if you use that kind of language. And yet when I came down here, I was the Houston area sales manager at Dank Office Imaging.
Mm-hmm.
And I would get hundreds of resumes sent to me a week. And this one day, I'm in my office and I hear an argument going on out in the hallway, and it's Patsy. She's my receptionist, and she's cussing some guy out, and he's cussing her out. And I finally walk out there. I'm like, what's going on? And this black guy says, she won't let me in to have an interview with you. And I said, do we have an appointment to have an interview? He goes, no, but you won't respond to my resume. And so I said, come on in. I'm really impressed that you I'm really impressed. This is the kind of guy I want. So he comes into my office. And I said, there's my stack of resumes. Where's yours? And I'm literally, it was 3 inches of paper.
Okay.
He finds his resume, pulls it out. It's typed. It's not done in a word processor. It's typed. And I said, well, you have nothing in here about education. You have nothing in here about prior sales experience. And he said, yeah, but I really want a sales job. And I said, well, have you read any sales books? And he goes, yeah, I read every sales book. I said, oh, okay. How about spin selling? Tell me about spin selling. Have you read that? And he goes, of course I've read spin selling. And I said, well, tell me about it. He goes, well, you go in, talk to somebody. If they don't agree with you, you spin their attitude around till they agree with you. And I said, no, it stands for situation, position, implication, need. And if you lie to me again, that's your last interview. Yeah. So I said, go get the book. There's a used bookstore down the street. You'll pay $1 for it. So he comes back a couple weeks later, and he wrote a book report on spin selling.
Okay.
And I gave him another book to read, and he did it. And I said, this is your 4th interview. You're still showing up in T-shirt and a jeans. And he goes, I can't afford a suit. I'm a garbage man. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, well, do you have $20? He goes, yeah, I got $20. I said, go to the Goodwill store and get yourself a suit and come back and see me. He came back a week later, and he was just dressed to the nines, man. He looked killer good. Yeah. He was great. And I said, I want to hire you. I said, fill out your application. So he filled out his application, and I walked it across the street to my division manager. And Larry looked across the street at this young man, and he goes, is that the guy over there? And I said, yeah, it's him. And he goes, no one's going to buy a copier from a, and then he dropped the N-word. I said, what? What did you say? He goes, you heard me, you damn Yankee. You're not from here, but you don't get it. No one's going to buy a copier from a, and he said it again.
Wow.
See, Larry believes in critical race theory. Mm-hmm. Larry believes that you should judge people by the color of their skin, right? Not the content of their character. Because Larry's a racist. Mm-hmm. He's a full-blown racist. And so, anyways, I said, you got a problem because I signed this guy's paperwork, and he's going to have a cause of action with the Texas Workforce Commission against you because of that.
At least, yeah.
And so, anyways, I hired this guy. He went on within 6 months to be one of the most successful sales rep that company had. Why? Because he wouldn't take no for an answer. Mm-hmm. And he showed the kind of character, which is what it's all about. It's not about the color of your skin, dude. It's about your character.
That's right. Buckle down and get it done.
Yeah. I mean, when he did that barge into my office, mm-hmm. he showed me everything I wanted to know about what I was looking for in a salesman. Sure. It had nothing to do with the color of his skin. So that story, is there racism? Yes, there's racism. Is it systemic? No, it's not. Life's about overcoming obstacles from jerks, morons, and racists.
Right.
And ignorant people, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree. So how did critical race theory come up as far as our school system is concerned? So you said it was because of COVID-19.
Yeah. So when COVID occurred, parents started hearing about it. And so we started working on legislation with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I think I filed it in January or early February, House Bill 3979. And then just out of the blue, we got a call from a parent whose child brought home a book called Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. That's literally what the book's called. Not My Idea.
I think I've heard of that book,
A book about whiteness. Now,
Yeah.
can you imagine?
Yeah,
Can you imagine if a kid came home from school with a book, Not My Idea, a book about blackness? Mm-hmm. You're going to stereotype black people. You're going to say
Right.
that there's a character trait that's unique to black people. There's a character trait that's unique to white people. Mm-hmm. And in the book, they actually have a white devil. Literally a picture of a white devil.
Wow.
That's in the book. And it's just a sad and disgusting and vile approach. And yet,
Right.
so anyways, this parent was mortified to see this, right? And so we started talking about this book and the bill on podcasts that we were doing, as well as social media. Mm-hmm. And man, I'm telling you, the phones just freaking lit up from parents all over the United States telling us about stories that they're having. But probably the most mortifying thing was the stories that we got from teachers. You know, we were told after this bill passed that House Bill 3979 has teachers in its crosshairs. Mm-hmm. No, teachers were in the crosshairs of critical race theory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did not want anything to do with teaching it. Don't give me this crap that this targets teachers. This doesn't target teachers. The educational experience is not about teachers. It's about kids.
Right.
It's about not brainwashing them with hatred and hate-filled beliefs.
I just can't understand why subject matter even close to this would be taught in our schools when things like this should be taught in the home. You know, my parents taught me to not be a racist. My parents taught me that, you know, black people, brown people, you know, everybody basically is the same, and you make it on your merit. You know, you go out and you take your knocks and you do what you can to get ahead in life. Doesn't matter what color you are.
Yeah, and it's so much about...
And that should be taught at home. I don't even know why any of this is being brought up in the school.
Yeah, so much about...
You know?
So much about learning is about how more is caught than taught. Mm-hmm. Like seeing an exchange between my parents when I was 8 or 9, maybe I was 11 or 12 years old, between my mom and dad and my grandmother. And my grandmother, you know, the whole issue of race was coming up. This was in the early 70s.
Okay.
And I can remember watching the race riots, Watts, and different things, you know, going on, Selma, and when you saw it on the nightly news.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it was big back then.
It was a huge issue. It was a huge issue, and I can remember my mom and dad talking about it and the problem of racism in the United States, and it was truly institutionalized in that day and age.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
segregation was terrible. Yeah.
Segregation was terrible.
Right.
It was state sponsored. Mm-hmm. George Wallace, on and on and on. Right, you and I can go out story after story. Right, but mom and dad were talking about it, and my grandmother said, "Oh, it's awful. Racism is awful in the United States." And that from, you know, a 70-plus-year-old woman at the time. Mm-hmm. And she said, I don't agree with black people and white people marrying. Mm-hmm. And my mom said something to the effect of, why, mother? Why is that a problem? Well, I don't know. And mom said, it doesn't matter. It's just the color of their skin, mother.
Right.
Skin color doesn't matter, mother. And so, as a young child, again, it's more caught than taught, right? How do we teach our children when these teaching moments become available? And I remember a lot of experiences like that as a kid growing up.
Right.
But how we teach our kids and what we teach them at home is critically important. The values, the mores that we convey to them is critically important, and it's their responsibility. It's not the school district's responsibility.
I agree. And I was raised in an area that was lower socioeconomic, and it was quite integrated. I mean, I think that white people in that neighborhood were probably about 30% or less. And my dad was a welder, and he was from Holland, so he was considered an immigrant. I guess it was hard for him to get a job and get equal wages at that time too. So hence we couldn't afford a lot, and so we lived in that type of neighborhood. And I think I just had more exposure to different types of people, and so it gave me different ideas than most people have. If you're raised in the suburbs here and you're always around white people and you're not exposed to people of color, you might have different ideas. Because you're learning the things that you learn either on the internet or on TV, and that's why I think it's so important to bring those teachings back home.
Right.
That's where it's got to end up.
And that's the whole problem with all these educators now that are supporting SEL, social and emotional learning.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that a little bit because I hadn't heard that term very much.
Yeah, so social emotional learning, for all intents and purposes, it's a Trojan horse.
Okay.
Because the outside looks so harmless and it looks so good.
Mm-hmm.
But what's inside social emotional learning is comprehensive sex ed as well as critical race theory.
Okay.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's the outside? What looks so good about social emotional learning? Well, cultural differences. So I can remember as a kid, if I was getting chewed on by my dad because I did something wrong, I'd look down and he'd take his hands and he'd put it underneath my chin, and he'd lift my chin up, and he'd say, look at me in the eyes, Steve. And I'd look at my dad in the eyes. And that's something that is maybe different in some families. So in some black families, a stern chin and glaring at your parents when you're getting chewed on by them, that's a sign of disrespect. Right? Or
even aggression nowadays.
Right. Yeah, you don't use in some families it's just not appropriate. What? That's just not in black families. It's in white families too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm telling you what, knock that grin off your face, boy. I'd say to my son, you knock that grin off your face, boy, or else. I'd say that to both my boys when they're just being disrespectful, And so whatever, okay. So if you're trying to tell me that you're trying to tell teachers that it's not always appropriate to have a kid look at you in the eye, okay, I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're also on top of that, you're teaching equity, not as equality, but as equal outcome.
Right.
And you're saying that in order to be inclusive, you have to accept, Johnny, you have to accept and make a way for and accept the fact that you may be a girl, not a boy.
Right.
And we're going to teach that to children. Well, that's not your place. You're completely out of place.
Right.
But that's the whole thing, is that as long as you allow SEL into the classroom, you're allowing all of what SEL is shoveling, and it's shoveling a lot.
And so do you think critical race theory and SEL is still being taught under a different umbrella?
It clearly is. And I'll tell you something. Let me show you this.
Okay.
So we had a teacher call our office. October, November of last year. And she said, Representative, I am a teacher at Conroe Independent School District. And at the orientation that we were doing for this school year, it was done on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told that if Billy comes to school and wants to be called Mary, you call him Mary. And you are not to call his parents. I was mortified.
Right.
What's more, if Billy's parents call the school and say, is he asking to be called Mary, you're supposed to say, not that I'm aware of. You're supposed to lie to him.
Why is that?
Well, this is DEI. This is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's also the whole BS of comprehensive sex education. of accepting of kids that are transitioning, even if they're confused. So they're going to help these kids transition without mom and dad even knowing it.
But your brain isn't totally developed until you're about 23 years old.
22,
So-
23, which
Yeah, so how
right. And we acknowledge that. So in the 86th legislative session, Hank, we said I didn't vote for this piece of crap bill, but in the 86th legislative session, we said that that an 18-year-old is not able to decide whether or not they should be able to buy cigarettes.
Not 100%, no.
And so we passed a law. I voted against it. We passed a law that 18-year-olds can't buy cigarettes,
Okay.
which is stupid. I mean, if you're old enough to get drafted to go defend, or if you're old enough to decide,
I still think that's young for the draft too, myself. But
yeah, well, and we don't have a draft, but we still allow an 18-year-old
right.
to go down and sign up.
Yeah, that's
right.
pretty darn young.
18, it's the age of majority. You're a full-blown American citizen. You have legal rights. You can't be told by your parents what to do. You're an adult. But the state of Texas said, no, your brain isn't developed enough for you to decide whether or not you should buy cigarettes. Yet we're going to say to a 6-year-old, you can decide to become a female, or you can decide to become a male. And here's the crazy thing is that you nailed it earlier. 80% of these kids are going to desist. Study after study after study. And this is not just studies done here in the United States. These are studies that are done all through Europe, and including the Scandinavian nations, where transgender lifestyle is very, very much acceptable.
Right.
But they have the same desisting rate, and they have the same suicide rate. And the kids that end up going further are the ones that have the highest rates of suicide. So it's not just the kids that socially lived a trans lifestyle, but it's kids that not just socially live that, but have gone through chemically, and then they've taken the next step to surgically living that lifestyle.
Right.
And once you go down that road, and then you decide at 22 or 21 or 20 or 18, wow, I've blown it. And then you have this regret, but you've done something that
there's
you
no
can't
going
stop.
back.
There's
at
no
that
going
point.
back.
Yeah.
I mean, even 60 Minutes did a story on this with Leslie Stahl, and it showed an 18-year-old beautiful young woman that, her story growing up was that she felt odd and, out of sorts and never felt comfortable in her body. And so someone told her at school that maybe she's a male. And within a 9-month period, she went from decided that she wanted to be a female to having top surgery and her breasts were cut off. To within 9 months realizing, wow, something's missing. She said, I felt like something was missing, referring to her breasts.
Right.
And really regretting it. Again, this isn't like the 700 Club or CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network. This is 60 Minutes, Leslie Stahl. And the whole premise of the piece that Leslie Stahl did was the fact that no one's encouraging these kids to hit the brakes. Just tap the brakes.
Right.
Slow down.
Yeah, you've
Right.
got a life in front of you, so yeah.
Figure out if this is something that you're really going to want to do. And that's all we're saying is that kids need to slow down. So here's this slide that
Okay. Yeah, you can just hold it up and the camera.
here's
can
a
see
slide
it.
that a parent got through a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act.
Okay.
And what it says is working with student confidentiality. Again, this is based on what this teacher asked about. What does support look like? Acceptance, respect, trust, honesty, and kindness. But again, this is about confidentiality. A student may be called by a name other than their legal name, nickname. Verbally, a student is allowed to be addressed by a preferred name. However, on school and or legal documents, only the legal name is allowed. Who looks at the legal documents? Moms and dads.
Right.
Right? A student may be called by a preferred pronoun,
Okay.
which means if you're a male, biological male, you can be called she or her.
Right.
Right? A student then has the right to confidentiality. That's what they're saying, that a student has the right to confidentiality. When communicating with parents, always use the student's legal name unless otherwise asked by the student. And if he wants to use the restroom in the nurse's clinic, he's allowed to do that, or she's allowed to do that. So I looked at this and I'm like, what the heck? But something else that came with it, I have no idea why they did this. By mistake, they also sent an email that goes back and forth between a gym teacher and a counselor, guidance counselor, where the gym teacher is told you're not allowed to tell the parents that Billy wants to be called Mary. And the guy basically saying, so you're telling me I should lie to the parents. Yes, that's correct. And so when I called, and what the guidance counselor is talking about here, see, you're saying, ma'am, that Title IX prevents teachers from sharing with parents that their child has decided to follow a transition lifestyle. And they're trying to conflate, the school district is trying to conflate that Title IX gives teachers in school districts the right to lie to parents. That's a lie.
That's scary.
It's also, excuse me, it's also bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, that's okay.
But here's the reality is that Title IX was for our daughters. My sister in 1977 was not allowed, 1972, she's not allowed to ski because there wasn't a girls' ski team. So my dad had to bring a lawsuit against the school district so that my daughter could ski on the boys' ski team, and she went on to be captain of the boys' ski team.
Okay.
That's what Title IX was for. Title IX was set to say you can't discriminate. You can't discriminate
based on gender.
Based on gender.
Okay.
And so they're saying now, they're conflating that telling parents that your kid wants to transition, they're saying that's a form of discrimination by being truthful with parents. It's so freaking ridiculous.
That's just convoluted.
And
that's
so,
taking the law and convoluting it.
Yeah, and so Curtis Null, the superintendent of Conroe Independent School District, said, you don't understand that this is an issue of Title IX, which I'd never heard that because I hadn't looked at this email yet. And I said, so when I looked at this, and then I thought back about the fact that he had conflated Title IX to be a means under which you lie to parents, I was like, how far is this going on?
Right.
But I said to him, he said, you don't understand. He said, these kids are very sensitive. They have a very high suicide rate. And I said, yeah, I do understand. I've got 30 years of marriage and family life counseling. And what you are doing is just absolutely destructive, because what you're saying to a child is you can't trust your parents. So if a kid comes to school and he's struggling with his sexuality, you're saying to that child, you can't tell mom and dad about this because they can't handle it. Does a child have that right? Is a child responsible enough to make a judgment about whether or not his mom and dad have the ability? Because what you're doing,
again, cognitive development.
Exactly. And what you're doing as an educator is you're saying to that child, your mom and dad can't handle this. And what you just did was you just undermined probably the most impactful thing to a child in their emotional development. You just said that mom and dad are not trustworthy.
Insufficient.
Mom and dad are not, they don't have the capability of nurturing you.
Right.
And loving you. Oh my God.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's terrible. But that's what CISD did.
The question that
I had doing, and they've not revoked that. They've never sent out an email. They've never sent out any kind of notification to teachers to take this back. That's what
I think that's why a lot of parents are pulling their kids out of school and homeschooling these days.
That's it exactly. And so, in fact, after my bill passed, at Conroe Independent School District, Tamika Taylor, she's assistant superintendent of the school. She said, I want to give a notification. I want to give notice to all of our teachers out there. There have been a lot of questions regarding House Bill 3979 around critical race theory. And she said, I was told by Carrie Gladys, who is our legal counsel, and she said, by the way, Carrie Gladys hasn't read the bill yet, but I was told that as long as we don't use the word critical race theory, we're okay. to do whatever we want to do. So I'm like, think about this. Like, dude, where'd you get your law diploma out of Cracker Jack box? I mean, you're telling people that you haven't read the bill, but it's fine to use the word. It's fine to teach critical race theory. Just don't use the word.
That's right.
And it's like, you got to be kidding me that this is going on. A counter-independent school district, one of the reddest counties in the state of Texas and in the United States.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And you're saying, go ahead, do it. Go ahead, do it. Go ahead, do it.
So they just changed the umbrella.
They're just changing the umbrella, and that's the whole thing. Like, if you look at my bill does not mention critical race theory.
Okay.
What it does is describes critical race theory.
Right.
Because it's the whole thing, right? I mean, we're on, hey, if you're a leftist and you're watching this show, we're on to you. We know that you're going to conflate and use different names, different labels, but you're going to still shovel the same BS to our children. And that's what they're doing. And so what we did is rather than label critical race theory, we described it. And I had someone that told me just yesterday, he said, I looked at your bill and your bill doesn't mention racism or it doesn't mention critical race theory. What it does, it mentions that you can't judge someone based on race or gender. Mm-hmm. It also says you can't blame somebody for the mistakes and failings of prior generations. Right. And he said, Steve, I was really amazed because I was told by the press in interview after interview that I saw that you can't teach about the Holocaust and you can't teach about Jim Crow and you can't teach about the Civil War and slavery. And he said, Steve, that wasn't anywhere in your bill. And I said, no, it wasn't, was it? I was really surprised, too, to see that the bill actually says that slavery and Jim Crow was a moral failure.
Right. It allows for truth in education.
Yeah. And we're like, yeah, man, we call it out. Mm-hmm. Jim Crow was wrong. It was evil. Right. It was unjust. Slavery was immoral and unjust.
Right.
Absolutely agree.
But there have been failings across the board. I mean, we're human beings. We're going to fail. We're going to make mistakes.
We're flawed. And if you look at 5,000 years of recorded history,
we're actually doing pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, show me a period of time when there was less subjugation of mankind. I mean, go back as far as you want to go back.
Right.
The Muslims subjugated everyone that they came in contact with as the hordes moved across Asia, and as they moved across Africa. Everyone was subjugated. They were equal opportunity oppressors.
Sure.
And it's not just the Muslims. This is always taken place. Look at during World War II, the Japanese subjugated Koreans. And they looked down on Koreans as an unknoble, dirty race. Mm-hmm. And so they took Korean women and they forced them into prostitution to service the warriors, the Japanese warriors during World War II.
Right. They
pumped their breasts full of silicone. It was a terrible, immoral practice.
Right.
But it's part of, if you go all the way back to Genesis 3, and the hatred that Cain and Abel had. Or that Cain had towards Abel, and he killed him. Hatred of your fellow man is the original sin, and to say that it's unique to white America is absolutely ridiculous.
I agree. And the big problem that I have with the entire subject matter of critical race theory is that you can't fight racism with racism.
You can't, buddy.
It won't work.
It'll never work. It doesn't.
And what it's going to do is just create more friction, create more problems, and extend the whole problem well beyond, because now we've got a new generation of kids growing up with the wrong idea.
You know what the saddest thing is? That in a secular level, we can look at that and say, you can't fight racism with racism. Mm-hmm. Yet in the church today, there's a book that's out right now called The Color of Compromise by Jamal Tisby. And this guy claims to be a Christian, and he embraces fully critical race theory and says it's still real today, and says that reparations need to be made, and continues to blame white people for not embracing their bigotry and hatred. And again, you're trying to say that racism is the response to racism as a Christian, when Jesus Christ says forgiveness and grace and atonement.
Right.
And Jesus says, if you think that the sin that your fellow man has against you is even remotely comparable to the sin that humanity has against me, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son to forgive us of our sins. And the sin that we have against God, that nailed his Son to a cross, is so much greater than any sin that we can have towards one another. And that is the doctrine throughout the whole New Testament. And yet in Galatians, Paul says to the church, he says, you foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you? You know, you've been given a gospel of grace and forgiveness. And now you're trying to say that you can bring your walk with me to a higher level through works. And that's really what Jamal Tisby and the Color of Compromise is all about, which is the whole thing is throw out the gospel and Reformation theology that we heard from Martin Luther, and instead embrace what's known as liberation theology, which is you buy your salvation. You buy your salvation by giving money,
Right.
to and giving your wealth away. In other words, socialism and Marxism.
Right.
It's just it's crazy.
Yeah, just the complication of society has just gotten really.
Yeah,
It's almost too much to even fathom sometimes.
it's crazy.
when you sit and think about it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what would you tell the average parent that has children of that age in Texas schools? I mean, what do they need to look out for?
Yeah. So one of the responses that we're hearing now that House Bill 3979 is passed, we're hearing from parents across the state of Texas that it's still being taught. Steve, we need to throw teachers in jail. That's what they're saying. We need to throw teachers in jail. And I'm like, we don't need more government.
That's true.
We don't need more government. We don't need to throw teachers in jail. And I said, I've said this over and over and over and over again. Government is not, as Ronald Reagan once said, government isn't the solution, it's the problem.
Right.
When you've got a problem, don't look to government to fix it. The same government that can throw a teacher in jail for teaching critical race theory is the same government that can throw a teacher in jail for saying to a child, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for
true
you.
too. Yeah.
Right? So do we really want that? And the answer is no, we don't. The solution is that parents have to get off their ass and they have to take their schools back. And so we can do some more things. We're gonna hopefully pass a bill this session that brings greater transparency to the classroom. We're gonna create parent portals for moms and dads to be able to see what material is being taught in the classroom, and then from there, it's up to us as moms and dads. We've got to start running for school board.
Right.
We've got to take back our school boards. We've got to make sure that these individuals that look down their nose at us, that are obtuse and arrogant towards our thoughts and concerns about the well-being of our children, those people need to be sent packing and kicked to the curb.
Okay. Well, that
Sorry if
sounds
it's
like,
a little strong.
no, it sounds like a solution. I mean,
Yeah.
there's got to be one because we can't allow this to continue.
We can't.
It won't work.
We can't, and it's funny, a couple of years ago, Dale Inman was saying, I was trying to find people to run for the school board, Conroe Independent School District. I couldn't find anybody. And now there are so many people that want to run for school board. It's crazy.
I'm glad because I have concerns about just apathy in local elections.
And that's what it's been. It's been apathy.
Right. And so I think that if we get people interested, they can definitely make a difference on the local
Sure
level.
they can.
So a lot of people still believe if you vote in the general election, you're voting for the president, that you're making a difference there. And you're making a small impact. But it's at home. It's on the local level with these local elections, school boards, things like that, that give us an opportunity to make the bigger difference. And if everybody gets involved in that, then hey.
So the Democrats, we are so far behind the Democrats. So ever since they won Colorado and they turned it blue overnight, they've started this initiative called LIFT, Local Investment for Tomorrow. And the whole idea is that locally you run people for precinct chairs, you run people for mud boards. You run people for the school board, get them elected.
Right.
Judges,
constables,
right?
everything.
But this is going on. This is going on all over the United States. So people wonder, why is my school board so liberal? This is such a conservative area.
Right.
Well, because the Democrats have been recruiting people to run for school board, and Republicans, we're too busy raising our family and running our businesses that we don't run for it, right? So who's there's this giant sucking sound, as Ross Perot would say. There's this giant sucking sound from the school board, and the people that are being sucked in are Democrats,
right,
or left-leaning people, and we've got to stop it.
Or at least make the biggest attempt we can.
We have to step up.
So there you go. Any legislation on the horizon we should be looking for?
Yeah, so we're a couple things. We're going to be filing a bill called the Transparency Act, the Classroom Transparency Act. We're going to file a bill called the None of Your Damn Business bill.
Really? I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
The None
What's
of Your
that
Damn
about?
Business bill. This is about the Fourth Amendment. And
Okay.
if your employer says, we want proof that you've been vaxxed, we're going to say, no, the Fourth Amendment says that that's between me, myself, and I.
Right.
And my personal and private
Yeah, it's just your private information.
is my private information, and you don't have access to it.
Okay.
You don't have the right to ask me about it either. And so we're also going to file we're going to file another bill against vaccine discrimination, but I think that's the primary one that we're going to work really hard on. We're going to file another bill protecting children from being transitioned.
What's vaccine discrimination? Just to clarify it.
Vaccine discrimination is you lose your job because you haven't been vaxxed. Or you can't go somewhere because you haven't been vaxxed.
Right, like a restaurant
exactly.
Yeah, amphitheater or something like that.
The other thing that we're going to work on is ESG.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever heard of it, ESG. So
I have
Google
not.
search ESG.
Okay.
Or ESG scores, environmental social governance. You'll see articles from Forbes, CBS, ABC, NBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post.
Just like social credit scoring.
Well, you've heard of you know what a financial score is, right? Credit score, right?
Right.
ESG is about environmental social governance. So if you use a company, you're going to be scored on your ability to be a green company. Social governance is, do you have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion officers in your company? And then governance, which is really truly about embracing the left. And you get a score based on those things. And so when the Biden administration came into office, they don't call it ESG. But what they said to Wall Street, and what they have said is that we're not going to look favorably. And not just the Biden administration, but who the Fed lends money to, is not going to look favorably on
grants,
companies,
loans.
is not going to look favorably on companies that do business with oil and gas companies. So, I've got a buddy that has a business. He has an office in Cleveland. He has another office down in the city. Between Cleveland, Texas, and Houston, Texas, probably 200-300 employees.
Okay.
And I called him up last week, and I'm like, man, you got to be killing it right now with $100 oil. And he said, Steve, we're at 30% capacity. I've had to lay people off. And I'm like, why? And he said, because of ESG. He said, oil and gas companies don't have the money. They can't no one will lend the money to drill wells. So there's
wow.
And so one of the things that I want to do, I'm talking with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, as well as Giovanni Carpiglione, state rep, and we want to set up a bank, a Texas state bank. It's a banker's bank that will backstop loans, so that lending institutions in the state of Texas can lend money to oil and gas companies so they can drill wells. So the Biden administration says, gee, we have no idea why we're not energy independent today. I can't figure it out. these companies, they have all these leases and they're not drilling wells. Well, they're not drilling wells because, number one, you cut off their money supply.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, you increase regulations through FERC, Federal Energy Regulation Commission,
Right.
on pipelines. So let's say if you want to drill a well, and you've got two things that are going to come out of that well, liquids and gases.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to burn the natural gas off, or do you want to capture that and sell it? You want to capture it and sell
Absolutely.
it, right?
Yeah.
But if you can't send pipe out to that wellhead to pick up the gas, you're not going to drill it.
Right.
They've made it nearly impossible for the oil and gas industry to thrive in the United States today.
Yeah, it's just overregulation.
And it's
terrible.
it's overregulated, and there's no capital. And this is all the Biden administration's fault. And the press knows this,
Right.
and yet they don't report on it.
Well, it's because of our press. I mean, you know a lot about that.
Oh, they
so.
suck.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why a lot of the other media, like YouTube and things like that, are doing so well. And the press is dying. They know they're dying.
Well, yeah, and then even on YouTube though, it's they squelch the truth.
They try. Yeah.
They try.
Yeah. Hopefully there won't be a whole lot of regulation here, but you never know.
Never know,
Yeah.
buddy.
Yeah, just got to keep working it until they start shutting it down.
Keep speaking the truth.
That's it.
Go Elon Musk.
There you go. Well, Representative Toth, I appreciate you coming in.
You bet, Hank.
I think this
good
is
to hang
a
out with
good
you, buddy.
conversation.
Yeah, this is fun.
And keep going. You're
Yeah.
doing good stuff, and I think it's going to be great.
Cool.
And I'd like to copy that and insert it in so that the guys can see it.
I'm going to send you I'm going to email this to you right
Great. Okay, fantastic.
now. All right.
All right, guys. Well, there you have it. And maybe you're a little bit more educated on what's going on. If you're a parent, especially in Texas, especially in this area, talk to your kids. Find out what they're being taught. If you don't like what they're being taught, show up at those school board meetings. And importantly, run for those school board positions. Got to take it back. Got to make it work. And more importantly, we got to set this country back on the right foot. It starts at home, guys. It starts at home. We can't start out in D.C. We don't have a foothold there, but we have a foothold here. For Representative Toth, I'm Hank Vatt, and this is Hank's Think Tank, and we're out.